Of course, this is absolutely impossible. There's a whole list of drivers that I have published many times. And in fact, we are on the worst case scenario, RCP 8.5. I published that several times with the record 2023, 2024, and subsequent 2025 temperature increases. Those are on RCP 8.5.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Climate Emergency Forum. I'm Herb Simmons, the author of A Climate Vocabulary of the Future, and I will be your host today. We're going to talk about something that sounds a bit abstract and esoteric, but I can assure you, when you listen to Paul and Peter, it's anything but abstract and esoteric. It is the representative concentration pathway and what they are, and in particular, one of those pathways, which is a scenario for the future, not a projection, not a prediction, has been considered now to be removed from any future analysis. That has engendered so much controversy that even the guy who occupies the White House in Washington has commented on it. So we figured if Donald Trump has commented on it, that Peter and Paul have to comment on it as well. And that's why we're with you today. So please stay tuned. As always, after our program, we'll do the Climate 3 of the bigger stories on the climate crisis in less than 3 minutes in total. If you like our program, and we hope you will, please like it, subscribe to our channel, go to our website, climateemergencyforum.org, share this video with your friends and your colleagues. Please leave us your comments and your suggestions for future programs. So I'm not going to say anything more because I am eager to hear what in the world this is all about and why has it reached the White House. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Peter Carter. Peter, as you know, is a former doctor. You've retired. You live in British Columbia. You founded the Climate Emergency Institute, and you've been a longtime member of the Climate Emergency Forum. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you, Herb. So the media is abuzz with RCP 8.5, which Herb referred to. That is a scenario, and we have a new set of scenarios out now. They call CMIP7. We have a new set of scenarios every time there's a IPCC assessment. So we've had a lot of changes in the scenarios. The media and indeed the scientists that I checked on their articles, they say that RCP 8.5, the 8.5 watts at 2100, is no longer plausible. They make a big point that all of their scenarios in this new CMIP7 are plausible. And the reasons why they say RCP 8.5 is over, has been ditched, is that apparently, according to them, we have increased our efforts to tackle climate change, and these have made a tangible difference. We have, they say, averted the worst case climate future once thought possible. So that's not actually how it is in the real world. And I should mention that of course, the deniers have had a heyday over this. The scientists are rejecting RCP 8.5. They've not rejected it, they've just replaced it with a whole other set of scenarios, but they have said that the very high emissions is not plausible. Another reason that they say this is that coal, they say, is not going to be a big problem, continuing to increase in the future. Now, on the coal reason for dismissing RCP 8.5, this is nothing new. The scientists have been saying this for 4 or 5 years. The 8.5 is not plausible. It relies on a large increase in fossil fuels, continuing coal, and that coal is over, they say, because we've got amazing renewable energy. So the increase in renewable energy is one of the reasons they give for retiring RCP 8.5. In the real world, the scenario that we're on is the global suicide scenario. As regards coal, I should mention that they're completely wrong with coal. Coal increased very rapidly up to 2010. It plateaued, it didn't drop until last year. 2025 was a record coal production, and coal investment, I'm told, will hit a record 12-year record in this year, 2026, and that's the International Energy Agency. So the paper does acknowledge that what these scenarios are based on are, quote, value judgments, which scientists say they can't make, and on hypothetical assumptions. So this is a very different set of scenarios. We've never had scientists making assumptions about the future before. We've always relied on actual emissions, but not this time. They predict that emissions are not going to continue increasing, and this is what the graphs, the projections show. The projections show that on this worst case scenario, which is now just called high H, that greenhouse gas equivalent emissions will continue to increase. Actually, they're increasing at about the same rate that they've increased for the past 10 years. However, the worst case scenario that they have, in fact, the temperature, the global temperature, does not continue to accelerate. It actually decelerates slowly over time. It took me a long time to recognize this, separating the graphs and the projections, but that's how it is. Of course, this is absolutely impossible. There's a whole list of drivers that I have published many times. And in fact, we are on the worst case scenario, RCP 8.5. I've published that several times with the record 2023, 2024, and subsequent 2025 temperature increases. Those are on RCP 8.5.
Thank you, Peter. Let me backtrack. I think many of our viewers may be wondering or assuming that 8.5 means 8.5 degrees Celsius or Fahrenheit or something like that. And in fact, it doesn't. It's climate speak for another factor that I'd like Paul to begin to explain exactly what the 8.5, and they're also, and we want to make it clear that this is as Peter said, the sort of worst case scenario that was set up a few years ago, but that there are a number of other scenarios with lower numbers that do not represent the worst case, but neither the IPCC nor the Council Conference of the Parties chooses and says this is the one we think is most likely. These are all put out there to be sort of what if? If this happens, what are the impacts? So, Paul, explain what we mean by RCP 8.5 or 4.2 or 1.6 or whatever the number that comes afterwards. Why is that used the way it is? And then take it from there.
Yeah, so the RCP 8.5, that's representative concentration pathway, 8.5 watts per square meter. So every square meter of the Earth could have heating of 8.5, like that's watts is joules per second, right? It's a power basically. So that amount of heating, which is going to be that high because of the greenhouse gases trapping the heat. So the UN, of course, United Nations, they have yearly climate conferences, the COPs, which we've attended many of, our group, yearly conferences. Every something like 5 to 7 years, typically, or 3 to 5 years, they put out a new report where they have 3 or 4 different sections. And we're talking about reports that are, all of the sections together. It's like 1,000 pages or something. Very comprehensive reports. They get scientists around the world to contribute to it. Peter's done some work with it in some past reports. So basically, the next report that comes out is Peter says they won't have these RCPs. They're going to have different phrases, and the RCPs were brought in. I think the last report before that, they used some different jargon. So basically, what they're saying is that because of renewables, because of nuclear power builds, because of maybe energy usage, demand projections slightly lower than they thought in their models, they're getting rid of this 8.5. But that doesn't mean we can breathe a sigh of relief, which is what the deniers have been pushing. So these computer models have consistently been underestimating the amount of warming that we're actually seeing on the ground. The best person to read their work is James Hansen's work, which is trying to use more data on how much we're warming over time and the different feedbacks. Of course, if we cross tipping points and everything's off the table. So the models are really, they're very important to do, and they're improving when they're getting better with AI and with more sophisticated inputs, but there's still, I would look at the raw data of the warming, like global surface temperature data around the world. New research has come from satellite monitoring. There's something called microwave sounders on satellites. There's about 4 different groups, including NOAA, University of Alabama at Huntsville, another group, and then the European Copernicus and the European reanalysis models. They're all showing, for example, these satellite sensors have detected temperatures of the lower troposphere, and they're finding a large rise in those temperatures, approaching about half a degree per decade. Conservatively, there's some measurements that are showing even larger rise. So if we're about 1.5 now, we can expect to be about 2 degrees within a decade, or even perhaps even 2.5. And those predictions from this recent work, I did a video on it, are exceeding even what Hansen has been arguing. So, of course, we know that the right wing will go and jump at any particular thing or any conspiracy theory to try to show climate change isn't a huge threat. Just for example, nuclear power plants, there's about 416 operational nuclear power reactors in the world. Some sites like Pickering or Bruce in Canada, they have 4 reactors on 4 or even 6 reactors at one site. So there's about 50 odd sites, just over 50 in the US. There's about 50 in China. The US is building 1 new plant. China's building 30 new nuclear power plants. China still burns a lot of coal. This RCP is really looking at what the effect will be of burning fossil fuels. Nuclear and solar and wind, all those things, battery storage, they're all causing a dent, but we're still primarily relying on fossil fuels, as everybody knows. I also want to bring up one very important point, which has really come out in the last couple of weeks. That is, what is our population going to do in the future? So there's been a lot of news in the last couple of weeks about some new research that is showing that fertility rates, fecundity rates around the world are starting to plummet. This is surprising even demographers who have studied population for years. So the latest numbers show instead of global population peaking in 2070, the most recent peer-reviewed papers show we're looking at more like 2055 for peak of population globally. Some countries have fertility rates that are even as low as approaching 1. I mean, Canada's 1.4. Anti-immigration policies in the US are likely to greatly lower population. So these models to 2100 are assuming population is still basically increasing or stable. If populations do in fact drop significantly, then all those models of what's going to happen by 2100 need to be reconsidered in light of the latest work we have on demography. So there's all of these factors that can affect that. But that's important for any projections we make in the future.
I want to go back, though, to the question of, again, I'm thinking about not just our viewers, but myself in the past. What is the conversion, if that's the right word, between watts per square meter and temperature? In other words, if we're talking about this 8.5 watts per meter, does that mean 8.5 increase in Celsius? If not, how does an ordinary member of the public who's interested in climate understand even the title of this, much less the details?
It's a very good question, Herb. Radiative forcing is the total net heat that our emissions and everything else deliver to the climate system, deliver to the planet. It's a driver. It's the main driver of global warming. But global warming is not increased. Well, global warming in the past has not increased as fast as radiative forcing, but right now, so forcing is very important, but they've abandoned that as their key guide. That's what the scientists have done. So 8.5 is gone. These, in my opinion, these new scenarios are misleading. As I say, the scientists say they're value judgments. When I go back to the original RCP 8.5, which was published in 2011, Van Buren again, who is on this team, and Rahani, they both published. They based this on the realities, the 2 main realities of population that Paul's already mentioned, but of course it's still increasing very, very, very fast. And GDP. Now, GDP is the main driver of radiative forcing, global heating, global warming, the whole thing. But this particular new scenario, this does not look at GDP. This does not look at population. It's based on the assumptions of the scientists that things are not as bad as they appear to be, and that we're making progress, which are absolutely not, and things are going to be a little bit better in the future.
Let me try to see if I can get you to clarify that. First, you're saying that there's no question the RCP 8.5 has been abandoned. Are you saying that radiative forcing in the new models is being abandoned, or that it will
Yeah, yeah.
continue, but
These are
just
not
in different models?
these are not based on radiative forcing, solidly based on emissions. So when I saw the first paper, which said these scenarios are emissions based, I thought this is great, but it's not at all because they make these wrong assumptions about what emissions are doing and what emissions are going to continue to do.
Because you also
Um,
said, Peter, I'm again trying to understand. You said the population and GDP
yes,
are
yes.
being abandoned or not. So what is,
GDP does not drive these new
and you're
scenarios.
saying neither this, because Paul just made the point the population is likely to, if the projections are correct, and they rarely are, but nonetheless, if they are, population is likely to stabilize and then dramatically decrease as the century goes on. You're saying that's no
No,
longer being considered?
they don't have that in these scenarios.
No, no, they're not
No.
including, they're not considering that possibility.
In fact, they don't even include impacts, amplifying feedbacks. They don't include carbon sink efficiency reduction, which we all have ongoing now. So this is really scenario la la land as regards these scientists.
Yeah, I would just add, I like Hanson's approach. I mean, I think they need to look at the Earth energy imbalance, right? Which is what Hanson repeatedly plots and talks about. So the Earth energy imbalance has been skyrocketing in the last few years, whether it be from reduction of low-level clouds reflecting sun away from the earth, whether it be, feedbacks. People talk about the decreasing albedo of the earth system, right? With fewer clouds and at the poles, less ice, the earth is not reflecting as much heat away as it was. So this is all tied up in earth energy imbalance, which incorporates a lot of the earth system feedbacks, which are changing not in our favor. They're making the risk of higher warming given even with stable emissions. If you lose all your feedbacks from the earth, you're going to get tremendous amounts of warming, which you are going to see in extreme weather events and more disruption of the jet streams. A lot of talk about the AMOC shutting down or collapsing, right? All of these things, they're not handled very well at all in models. I think we need to rely more on observations, and it's very worrying. Some of this ocean observations that's been in the news recently, if the US government actively removes sensors, ocean buoys, Argo floats, and we know less and less about the changes in the ocean. You were mentioning how 8.5 watts per square meter relates to temperature. Herb, the problem is there's a huge lag in the temperature rise. So you can go to 8.5, but it takes a lot of time for the oceans we know absorb over 90% of the heating, of the global heating. Global warming on the planet is ocean warming for the most part. 90% of the heat goes into the oceans. It takes time for the heat to go into the oceans. It takes time for the heat at the surface of the oceans to be spread throughout the water column and heat the water below. There's no simple answer. It depends on how long that 8.5 would be acting on the earth, and then the temperature would change over time, and you can calculate what the end result would be of temperature, but the lags are very crucial. So it's not the best metric to be looking at. So, I mean, the problem is the media and right wing jumping on this saying, hey, this is a great thing for climate. The models are wrong. They were too, dire. But the reality on the ground, as Peter said, is quite different.
There's another big problem, which I can mention very quickly. All the focus is on 2100. So yeah, the scientists have always projected to 2100, but it's not 2100 we're interested in. What we're interested in is now, today, the next 10 years, the next 20 years, right? And as Paul says, and Hanson's right, 1.5 is obviously gone. 2 degrees C is gone as well. And 2 degrees C is a global population and climate catastrophe. But another thing that this new scenario idea omits is impacts. It doesn't omit any impacts. And we've got impacts increasing, accelerating. So we need to focus on the now.
Lots of people are talking about this super El Nino that's forecasted for later, the end of this year, going into next year. Well, last time, just recently, 2023, 2024, blew away global temperature records. The new work is showing that clearly after we have a super El Nino, the temperatures don't return to what they were before. It becomes part of the system. And the overall background, the acceleration of global warming signal is still there. The El Ninos can notch things up. And if temperatures don't recover after they're over, they only recover halfway or whatever, then this is all part of the great acceleration of the warming. So, sure, I mean, talk about all the computer models you want. We're at 1.5. If we reach 2 degrees or even 2.5 over the next decade or two, there's going to be catastrophic impacts on our ability to grow food on the earth, on our ability to survive the ever increasing extreme weather events and heat waves and effects on water security and all the rest of it. So if global population does in fact peak in, say, 20 years and start to drop, then that gives the earth a fighting chance after that. But, we're hitting up against all these things in the short term. There's a lot of reasons for the people not wanting to have kids. I mean, if you think the world's going to collapse, well, let me talk about the second law of thermodynamics. Entropy is increasing, basically. We're not addressing today's problems. There's too much. Everybody's worried about maybe Trump's next tweet, maybe what's happening in some country, but all of these big major things are happening, whether we talk about them or not on this planet, and we're going to see the impacts of this. We're starting to see the impacts. Temperatures have notched up, accelerated since 2015 on the planet, huge amounts. And we had a collapse of Antarctic sea ice. This is a remote region of the world, Antarctica. We've had a collapse and a change in the nature of water and where the warm water is, water coming up, melt rates, etc. So all of these things are sort of put under the rug, and we're talking about what's happening today and tomorrow. And we need to develop some sort of sense of what's happening. So this is a perfect example, this RCP 8.5 being jumped on, saying, okay, climate change isn't so bad. I mean, climate change isn't even happening according to the US government, right? And the problem is they're planning on spending huge amounts of money to pull up the ocean buoys, reduce the Argo floats that are doing vital measurements of our physical ocean systems. Like, it's criminal. It's absolutely criminal in my opinion. So, that this is where we are right now.
Okay, well, let me thank Peter and Paul. We've covered a lot of territory. I think the bottom line is that it's important for all of us to pay attention to these projections, because the fact is, and we didn't talk about this today, but this worst case projection of RCP 8.5 was used in many, many climate papers, and it was implied, if not said, that it was a business as usual projection and not the more extreme one. That's has nothing to do with how accurate it turns out to be or not turns out to be, which I think most people in the climate field that I've read and talked to indicate that that was a major communication error on the part of the climate community that opened up these criticisms from folks. So I just want to sort of say that I mention this not to be critical of climate scientists or communicators, but to say that it's not only how these models are constructed and what they include or not include, as both Peter and Paul have said, but how they're used and how they're communicated that's equally important. And I think that's something, since we're going to a whole different set of models from what Peter has said based upon different criteria, we really have to pay attention to not only what the models say, but what people think they say. So with that, let me leave it there. As always, thanks so much, Paul. Thanks so much, Peter. And I will now turn to the Climate 3. So the first Climate 3 story is one that I have to take a deep breath before I even articulate it. And that's a study came out in India and it was reported in a newspaper called the Hindustan Times just a day or two ago from when we're recording this on a Wednesday. And it says that a single day of extreme heat in India is associated with an estimated 3,400 excess deaths, while a heat wave lasting 5 days could lead to around 30,000 additional deaths, according to a study. The newspaper explained that this study actually was done by University of California researchers, and they adopted findings from a multi-city study of heat-related deaths in 10 Indian cities. Some of you may have read the opening chapter of Kim Stanley Robinson's Ministry for the Future, which basically takes this idea and probably multiplies it by 100 or more. Very grim, very real. We can easily talk about climate. We can talk passionately about it, as Peter and Paul have done, but this shows today's impact, not 20 years, not 30 years from now. That's sort of story number one. Story number two has to do with the fact that I think I mentioned this in recent weeks. Some of you may have read about this, that the current United States administration is attempting to dismantle the National Center for Atmospheric Research, which is the gold standard, not just in the United States, but throughout the world, of research, not just on climate change, but on every aspect of climate, with the most brilliant climate scientists and researchers in the United States and maybe on the planet. The tentative good news is that a judge has temporarily blocked the Trump administration's efforts to dismantle it there, and we will see whether it happens or not. Interestingly, the story goes, and you may find this hard to believe even after following the president of my country, but the story goes that the Trump administration did this not because of any climate goals, but because it was an act of revenge against the Colorado governor who had imprisoned, or he didn't imprison, the courts had imprisoned a clerk in a Colorado county for falsely tampering with an election. And he wanted her out. The president wanted her out. She has now been let out of jail. So maybe leading one woman out of jail in a rural county in Colorado may help save this climate institution. If any of you can understand the logic behind that, please let me know. And the third and last point is no big surprise. 2025 wildfires were the costliest ever, even though there was less area burnt there, that at least in the United States, South Korea, and Spain, worldwide, at least $54 billion, sort of literally and figuratively, went up in smoke there. This, of course, is an inexorable trend. We'll look back in some years and say, oh, it was only $54 billion. You had a good year in 2025. So with that, those are the three of the bigger. There are many, many stories we could have talked about this week. 3 out of about 30 that I looked at. You may have your own choice. I also want to say, I haven't said this before, I encourage you to go to the Carbon Brief. You can subscribe for free. You can get an email every morning, Eastern Time, about 4 a.m. or so. You don't have to get up then to read it. It will have the most important climate stories from the entire planet. With that, as always, I want to thank Paul. I want to thank Peter. I want to encourage everybody to like and subscribe to the Climate Emergency Forum. Don't forget, we now have podcasts. And so take a look at our podcasts. Thanks to Charles and Heidi for putting that together, in addition to all the other work we do and you do. And we will, as always, see you next week. Goodbye.